Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a very, very interesting case study, if you might call it that, of a terrible performance of music that we really wanted to hear and a composer we wanted to get to know. And for a long time, we really didn't know any better because it was the only show in town. I am referring to Cyril Scott, his Piano Concertos 1 and 2, and Early One Morning, a poem for voice for piano, and orchestra. It features John Ogdon, who we've just been praising to the skies for his recently released Argo box, his Argo recordings, with the London Philharmonic under Bernard Herrmann, who we also like to praise to the skies. But here's where it all breaks down. It all goes to hell. First, let's talk about the composer. Cyril Scott. He lived from, it's amazing, 1879 to 1970. Woohoo! By which time he had been roundly forgotten. Most of his best work, or the work that we care about, was done in the early decades of the 20th century. He's described sometimes as the English Debussy, but as the Wikipedia article on him states, that is, a comment people make who have no knowledge of either Scott or Debussy. But he is kind of a mixture of Debussy and Scriabin, and he's a late romantic decadent. You might call him, I call him, G-rated Scriabin or Schrecker, or those people, those heavy-duty German, sensualists, except Scott's English, so there's no sex in his music anywhere. And the fact of the matter is, he was not a great tunesmith. He liked lush, colorful orchestration. And you get more harp glissandos per minute than just about any other composer in the universe. His music is very richly textured, almost always evocative and interesting to listen to. And when it's well played, it sustains its length, even though there's no reason for it to do anything that it does. It really has charming moments and delightful moments. He wrote 2 piano concertos and some other works for piano and orchestra, and this disc was, Lyrita actually issued the first concerto separately, and then finally all this stuff got stuck together on CD. Now, Bernard Herrmann was not a good conductor. He was okay with his own music, and occasionally he could hit it off with someone else's, but he was notorious, even when he was doing the CBS radio orchestra, for conducting things at extraordinarily slow tempos when he had his opportunity. It wasn't as obvious in his radio days because he had to stick to a timetable. So that certainly influenced the speed at which things moved. But essentially, when he had the opportunity to make his own recordings, they were pretty dreary for the most part of music other than his own. And so that's one thing we need to keep in mind. John Ogdon also was a tremendous pianist and a remarkable artistic personality, but he was also highly variable, some might say because he was manic depressive. But here you have him and Bernard Herrmann together, 2 kind of musical weirdos, taking on rare music. And Ogdon's willingness to do unusual or modern music, neglected music, was so admirable. We all loved him for it. We did. We really did. And so, the opportunity to hear this stuff was just fabulous, really fabulous. And the point I'm making is that there was no competition. And because there was no competition, nobody really knew how the stuff should sound. They get the benefit of the doubt, or they got the benefit of the doubt. But then, Chandos made a 4-disc series of Cyril Scott orchestral music, including his symphonies and piano concertos and cello concerto and other orchestral pieces. And oh my, all of a sudden we heard this, or I did anyway, in a very, very different light, because Howard Shelley was the pianist, Martin Brabbins the conductor, really good with this unusual stuff. And they really revealed Scott's strengths and weaknesses, his strengths being his great sense of color and sort of questing spirit. He was a loon. He was into alternative medicine. He wrote pamphlets on, how vegetables cure cancer. And, he was an occultist, a spiritualist, all this really wild stuff going on in his life. A poet, he was more probably better known, or at least as well known for his literary stuff as for his musical stuff, kind of like Wagner. But in any case, you know, they did these things, and we said, okay, you know, it's nice music, and that's it. But then the Chandos series came along, and it turned out that Brabins and Shelley knocked 10 minutes off of the length of the first concerto and 6 minutes or so off of the second concerto, which is actually a short work anyway. It's about 20 some odd minutes long, less than 20 minutes. It ought to be, not here. And we realized that these were shapeless, flabby performances that did not do the music justice at all. They are absolutely dreadful. And it's a shame. It's just a shame because, you know, it got us into Scott. I'll give him that. You know, we got to hear the music. We got to get a sense of what he was about, kind of, sort of. And because it's also, you know, full of thickets of notes and colorful things, you might at first not be so conscious of just how droopy these performances are. But now we know. Now we know that this was a CD from hell. And a shame, a pity, really a pity. But an interesting, like I said, a case study in circumstances where there is no competition and we have very little choice or sense of how the music is supposed to go or what it can be or what its potential is in performance. And it only took one other recording to shatter the illusion here, because these really aren't very good. But I thought I'd talk about them all the same because it makes a fascinating little story in the history of recording and our approach to unusual or neglected repertoire. So keep on listening, friends. Maybe not to this. Get the Shelley stuff on Chandos if it's still around. Take care. Thanks for joining me.